can everyone see? Let's see if I can put the chat down here. Nice. So then, yeah, it's going to be quite a short session because I'm quite a lazy guy as it goes. But if you've got any questions, obviously, let us know. I'll have the typical time at the end as well to answer any questions. But yeah, my main thesis today is going to be do as little as possible and get them to do as much as possible. It's not just for, personal laziness. I also think, or pretend to think at least, that this is also useful for the students. So just to explain, where I'm coming from. So in Hong Kong, I teach at English Excel. It's kind of a typical small language school that we've got over here. So we've got like multiple little centers. And our sort of selling point is that we've got quite small class sizes, like maximum 4 students. But the sort of lessons, that I want to impart today are just as easy with bigger groups. More kids to share it around with. I'll be talking a bit about online spaces as well as physical spaces. We're actually teaching on site at the moment. Touch wood, thank goodness. So we have been teaching online as well, and we've got some lessons learned there. So first things first, I'm going to be sharing my workspace. Now, why do you think that's a good idea? So this can be a digital workspace. So a Google Doc is great. And that's typically what we use for teaching online. We used to track things with a Google Doc. So although I've changed the name, this is a real Google Doc which I used with a student. Let me show you. Yeah, let me show you the real version. So so that allows us to keep track of things from lesson to lesson. So here's some words that came up, for example. With the pronunciation and the meaning. And we also do sort of regular reading. And for that kind of stuff, it keeps everyone on the same page. And obviously, the big advantage of sort of sharing a Google Doc is that you can not just share your screen, but share the actual document with the kids. So a degree of trust is involved here as well. But if you share it and allow anyone with the link to edit, you can pop it in the chat and get them all to edit it. I'm not going to let you do that now. I don't trust you yet. But that's possible with the kids. So some of these things I typed, but some of them Doris typed. And it gives her a little bit of a space to customize things as we go along. So, a silly story that she wrote using some of the words that we came across. I think we came across those words during some reading, and she had trouble with them, as you might with a word like pageant. So we did some example sentences, and then we expanded those into a story. So it gives you a nice collaborative space. This is her profile of herself based on a mutual interview. It's interesting that she regards herself as more lazy than me. I probably contest that, but she's actually a pretty hardworking kid. And she's obsessed with these things, Sumako Garashi or something. But anyway, yeah. Have a shared space of some kind, even if it's the whole class sharing one document. And that's a good idea, I think. And even if it's just Google videos and things like, YouTube videos or something like that, the temptation is very much for the teacher to control everything. But if you've got, at least even with a big class size, yeah, you can have another kid share their screen and spotlight their video so that the other kids can share a YouTube vid with the rest of the class. And that means that they control the pressing play. That means that they control rewinding and going back. I mean, all of our kids know how to do that anyway. And they've been getting lots of practice with staying at home recently. So why not take advantage of it? Why not give them a little bit more control? Of course, this is all behavior dependent. I wouldn't do this with every class. I wouldn't do this with kids that I wouldn't trust with that power. But if they're just rambunctious, if they're just enthusiastic, maybe too enthusiastic, giving them a little bit of power gives them a little bit of responsibility as well. And more often than not, they step up to the plate. I mean, do you guys kind of trust your students with things like this? I mean, not just like, handing stuff out and tidying up at the end, or, but yeah, do you trust them with more than that? Like controlling the computer, controlling the video? No, not very trustworthy people. Yeah, I often find adults are no better than kids, actually. I don't know. Maybe I've just had particularly naughty adults and particularly well-behaved kids, but yeah, I've not found much correlation. I've had like sort of 7-year-olds even, behave very solemnly as they press play and whatnot. Yeah, they don't need to control the screen itself, but they could. But working on a Google document together, it's pretty good. I have had it where I've had to rescind sort of editing privileges from a kid, but it's the exception rather than the rule. I would encourage it anyway. So now that if you do trust them and to give them a modicum of power, here's some things that they could do with that power. So you're a busy guy, you're a busy teacher, you can't be doing all this planning, so you decide to let your kids do the planning, or adult students, or wherever. So this is a sort of example plan thing that we use, and it can go by we tend to plan sort of like 12 weeks blocks at a time, like what kind of resources we'll need and what kind of lessons we'll be doing. And I'm going to argue that there's no real reason why we need to hide this from the students. It's actually pretty good. I've had nothing but positive experiences with it. Like, they've been surprisingly sensible about it. Of course, you need to teach them how to do this, right? Just the same way that we were taught how to sort of plan what to teach, they also need to do so. So I usually tell them, like, whether it's a book or a bunch of worksheets that you've got available, have them look ahead, have them look at the resources which are available to you, and have them prioritize. Obviously, you need to tell them that they need to have a balance of activities, whatever that balance might be between, I don't know, writing and reading and so on. And although it's not going to be a fast process, I think it's super useful. So online or not, if you got some sort of shared workspace, you can sort of throw all those details out there. Ask them questions about what they think they will need, what they will struggle with, and they'll usually answer relatively honestly. Even with young kids, I've had this. So, like, if I ask a kid, like, oh, what do you find tricky? What do you find easy? And it's like, oh, grammar is tricky. Okay, then, so here's some grammar topics that are coming up. Which ones would you like to focus on? Even if it's as simple as that. And we often do sort of, debate activities and arguments and discussions. And this is obviously a great opportunity to discuss something very real, very relevant to the students, but practicing all of those skills, how to be polite, how to disagree, how to agree as well, how to reinforce their points and support their arguments. So, the structure of the lesson itself could be having them rank order things, or just put lessons in an order, what they would like to look at, whether that's pronunciation or comprehensions or whatever. Has anyone actually, I'm curious, has anyone actually done something like this? Got their children to sort of plan weeks ahead? Yeah, absolutely, Rachel. Yeah, it's all about ownership. It's like a real activity, it's not some made up nonsense. It might not be the most, I certainly wouldn't recommend it obviously every week. You can't do it every week, but every now and again, it's great. I have done it with adults, but yeah, like I say, I've done it with younger kids as well. I think the youngest is probably 12-year-old, something like that. Yeah. They just need to understand that, that lessons are a thing and that they contain different subjects, and which subjects would they like to study. Yeah, I thoroughly recommend it. It's been pretty fun as well, and the kids can get quite heated about it when they disagree about these things. Oh, voting is good though. I like voting. Obviously, that's a nice democratic way of resolving irreconcilable differences. Nice. Yeah, of course. You could always use it just to fill blank slots, of course. Yeah. Because you may well have other priorities set by say the course book or something like that. Okay, but beyond just planning the broad lessons going forward, why not more in detail? Why not making whole lessons? So here in English Excel, we have a sort of worksheet-based curriculum. It might not work quite so well if you're kind of tied to a course book or something, but even then, I'm sure you've got some space for some wiggle room where students can create their own activities. And not necessarily when they're older, but at least when they're experienced with a school, at least, they know what kind of activities you do, what kind of activities can exist out there. And if not, you can brainstorm them and get them to plan an actual lesson. So right down to the materials used. So as a warning, this is if planning a sort of syllabus and what kind of broad strokes you're going to do in future lessons is not quick. This is definitely not quick. This is a proper project. So this is just one reading text that was done by a sort of 10-year-old student of mine who was mad about Greek myth. So here's the kind of teaching notes. He didn't have much involvement in the sort of teaching notes, but he wrote the bulk of the laminates himself. So all of these little comprehensions he decided to write. So obviously this was mostly because he was absolutely mad about Greek myth. He was into Percy Jackson or something, if you've heard of those books. And this was a way of me able to harness that enthusiasm and channel it into something actually real. So rather than just like, I'm sure if I just told him, could you write me some little short paragraphs about Greek gods, he would do so. But this gave it a real purpose. This gave it something that was meaningful. So this lesson exists because he made it, at least, partially. I did the pictures, by the way, taking photos from Wikipedia and then adding some nonsense on Paint. And although the language is probably not what I would use, he enjoyed it immensely. And his favorite was Poseidon for some reason. That was his justification. I don't know why. So yeah, as another example, I had a kid who was very much into planes and aviation, and I'm not. I couldn't care less. But I was able to use him and his classmates, actually, who were mostly involved in it, to create a lesson about planes and aviation. Obviously, this involved lots of, he didn't know all the jargon, all the vocabulary, involved lots of brainstorming and research and so on. But just having that real goal in mind really focused things. And really meant that, no, there's a deadline for this. I want to teach this lesson in a few weeks, so it needs to be done. And for this one, I even did project planning with him. So we did this kind of thing too. So we broke up how we were going to do it and how we were going to break up this big project that we were doing into sections, lesson by lesson, which bits he would write when. So yeah, it was super rewarding for him, and he was super proud of it at the end. That's nice. Yeah. So Rachel says about researching some chosen area and then creating just single activities for other groups. Sure, absolutely. I see no reason why you couldn't do that. Even with coursebook related stuff. So it's say they've read some sort of comprehension, some sort of reading, and you've got them to write questions about it, write difficult questions about it, and you can talk about what makes a good question for a learner. So it needs to be answerable. If I can't answer it, then it's not a good question. That's usually a problem. And if it's too easy, and you could just glance at the page, then it's too easy. But once they've got over those hurdles, they can sort of craft nice comprehension questions for another group to use. And it raises the stakes, of course, for them if you are actually going to use it. And you can give them feedback about that as well. Why not? The next sort of lesson, when you see them after you've taught using those questions that they created, yeah, let them know how it went. And well done, Hayden, for example, for answering a question that only one person got right. Has anyone got any hang-ups about this? Does anyone think? Anyone got any concerns or anything? It is a lot of work, for example. So for low-level students, yeah, not so much, right? They at least need the ability to. So generally, they're going to be creating material for a similar level to themselves. Although you can have higher level students grade their language for lower level students to use their material, it's probably not that useful, right? Generally, we want to be pushing a little bit further than what they can do. Maybe for advanced or proficiency students, then it might be useful for them to learn about how to grade their language, but it's a valid communication problem that real speakers will have. But generally, we want to push them, right? So usually, if we're for about the same level, they make the materials for. And for low-level students, if they don't have the language to ask the questions, at least, or to write the material at all, it's not. They could inform what the lesson is about. For example, if they like planes, then they can talk about their love of planes and what they like about them, and then you could write that down and show them that. But they're going to be less involved in the actual creation of the materials. So yeah, I don't know, intermediates or higher, I would say. Maybe pre-intermediates, I don't know. For balancing student involvement, yeah. So for this example, this was a one-to-one, right? So it was much easier. For the planes example, though, that was the whole class. One student was the most interested, but you do that in the kind of planning stage. So break up the task, whatever it is, into sections. So this group of students, whoever you are, you could be responsible for the reading. This group of students, you need to be producing this extra material, whatever it is. And then they can obviously swap and compare work and improve each other's, do some peer correction, that kind of thing. But yeah, you need to control for that kind of thing in the planning stage for certain. Controlling the language use. There's nothing stopping you from correcting stuff afterwards, right? But again, it gives there's no reason why you need to. If it is language mistakes that are useful to them, that it's within the zone of proximal development, to use the jargon. If it's something that they would benefit from learning, then yeah, feedback stage at the end of the lesson suddenly becomes way higher stakes. Yeah, and you can focus on the form there. But sure, there's nothing to stop you at the end of the lesson just to correct stuff. Why not? At least they've done the bulk of the work for you. So for these texts here, yeah, I did some correction at the end, stuff that was too small to go over, and obviously these are quite extensive texts, so I wasn't going to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb with the student. But okay, so they've planned your syllabus for you. They've made some lessons for you, albeit slowly. What's next? Well, I'm gonna contend that explaining stuff to students is only sometimes useful. So I think a lot of, at least when I've been training new teachers, they often have this idea that teaching is the art of explaining stuff. And that's not bad, right? I think as I say here, I think elicitisis, this idea that you ask questions for, hundreds of hours until the student eventually gets the right answer, that's not useful either. Sometimes just supplying the answer is the correct course. And if it's just, something that they wouldn't benefit from, that they wouldn't benefit from a lengthy explanation, don't give it. Just give the answer that they need. So for example, the spelling of because. This is my biggest hurdle, I think. So, the phonics and the spelling rules involved with the word because, they're far beyond the actual level of the word itself. So yeah, things like that, just tell them. But for everything else, for the usage of grammar, for the meaning of jargon words, or the topics of the words related to the topic of the lesson, if they can teach it, why aren't they? It's far more useful. Even in the time of Zoom, I think this is perhaps fallen by the wayside a little bit, or at least that's what I've noticed. Because I think the temptation is to return to sort of this lecturing mode, as I'm almost in now, apart from your nicely written feedback. And there's no reason why that should be the case, at least with semi-reasonable class sizes. If you do have if you are able to listen to the students and have them feedback, then rather than explaining something yourself, always ask another student first. And that also gives you a better idea about the sort of general ability of the class, whether something has been got or not. So yeah, if you ask two people and they both don't know, then you definitely need to go into more serious detail about it, whether that's the usage of the passive or how to use particular vocabulary, whatever it may be. So I've written here about guided discoveries and things like that. This idea that you do some elaborate worksheets which leads them towards a particular grammar point, and this is good because this gets them to think more about the grammar, whatever it is, right? Peer teaching is the same thing, at least for the person explaining. So teachers often tell me that they only really learned a particular grammar point when they had to teach it, sometime after when they had to teach it, actually. And this is true of students too. Until you've had to explain something and really think about it, you might not know it that well. So get them to do it. Don't rob them of that opportunity, even if it takes a little bit longer. Even if you have to teach them how to do it to some degree, then it's still useful. And this ability to how to explain difficult things that you might not have the perfect words for, this is the most useful skill when you're learning a language, right? And if they can gain confidence with that, then I would argue that most things will follow. Yeah, for revision in particular, yeah, I would say so. Because in that case, you're working from like a general core of common knowledge, whatever that may be, the subjects that you've been studying, and then from that, what can they explain? What can they say? What have they actually took in? Do you find peer teaching is possible online? Do you still do it to some degree? I mean, I would say I've seen it a lot less, unfortunately. Yeah, students are sometimes less confident. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for again, for smaller groups, obviously it's possibly easier, but even for larger groups, there's if you have the ability at all for any of them to speak, like if that's not complete chaos, then you speaking or one of them speaking, it's equal for everyone else in the room, right? And it's more beneficial for the person speaking. I think the temptation is to just, be as efficient as we can and move on as quickly as possible with online learning, because it is a bit more awkward than face-to-face. But we're skipping over the useful stuff in some cases there. Don't be as efficient as you can. Get them to think as much as they can. But anyway, last thing, kind of leading on from that. So they've done all the explanations for you. They've planned the lesson for you. They can also mark work for you. Why not? So here we see the marking scheme that I use. Feel free to use it. It's not copyrighted or anything. So, missing words and underlined mistakes and so on. And I try and teach this to the kids as soon as possible, so that they understand it and also so they can use it. Now, I should hasten to add that this marking is only ever done in pencil. You don't want peers to scribble over someone else's work. Yeah, with online work, you don't want them deleting stuff and correcting things all over the place either, if they're sharing a Google document, for example. But if they can, then yeah, peer correction is absolutely fantastic. Again, it tests whether the problems that a student is having are common to the group or whether they're just unique. And it also solidifies whatever the problem is in the mind of the person peer teaching. So my typical sort of procedure is when they finish some work. So, I ask to see it, have a look at it, have a look through and say it's, notice the mistakes, notice the good things. I may point out the good things. More often than not, I forget. I probably should. And then I say to them, okay, fast finisher. There's a problem with question 3 and 6, and past tenses are terrible. And then send them back. Being kind of vague is cruel, which is great. It makes me happy, but it also makes them think more about the mistakes. I think correcting student work is useless. Explaining things can sometimes be useful, but I think correcting student work only tests you. It doesn't really help the student whatsoever. So doing peer correction where you can at least helps the person who's doing the peer correcting. So yeah, fast finishers after they've corrected stuff, then I send them off to help other people, even in online lessons. Following on from the pronunciation points before, students will have to try a little bit harder to explain themselves if they have to explain for one of their peers. You won't be naturally filling in the gaps for them, which is great. Photocopies and things like that and copy pasting, sure. Yeah, you could do that. It's a little bit more work, and like I say, I'm a pretty lazy guy, but by all means. The benefit of Google Docs, of course, is that you can undo whatever was the problem. And yes, you do need to teach them how to do corrections. So the procedure for when I do peer correction is that they're not allowed a pencil. Unless they're just going to be doing, question marks and underlining. That's all they're allowed to do. And they're not allowed their own work. That's very important. So they can't show what they've done. Because obviously that's the natural, most efficient way of getting another student to be correct. You just show them what you did, right? So yeah, disallow that. Get them to think harder and explain. And yeah, the alternative, of course, with a fast finisher is that you have to make up something else for them to do, or there's dead time. They're just going to be sat there doing nothing much useful. So yeah, remember peer correction. Remember it even with online work. Has anyone done this with Google Documents or something like that? Or I think, the hardest cases, of course, where you've got if you've got online work and the students are handwriting their responses and then holding them up to the camera awkwardly. Yeah, for sure. When the hyperlink works, yep, for sure. Well, so those are my ideas. Yeah, highlighting I haven't really done, actually. Yeah, why not? You can, of course, if you're going to be share screening some work, you can always use the sort of annotation function if you trust them with it to annotate on the screen. That's nice as well. Yes, adding a little bit of structure to a Google document as well. Yeah, so that everything's marked who's got who. Generally, students are hesitant at first. Obviously, you get some students who absolutely love to correct other people and they love to boss each other around. And I fully endorse that. I fully support that. But yeah, some students are just going to be shy. In which case, say it's a task. It's like, now it's your job. I think one of the most useful phrases that I teach my new teachers is, now you can be the teacher. So whatever activity that is, it's not an option. It's kind of like, okay, let's extend this activity. Let's get you helping each other and peer teaching, whatever that is. And it's your job. You've got to do it. But they like it plenty. I haven't used OneNote. Is there any advantages to using that over Google Docs? Sometimes I just use, just if I need to quickly type stuff, I'll just display things on Notepad. I wasn't aware OneNote was shareable. Is that it?
All right. So yeah, thank you, Richard. Let's